One deal changed everything. A $15 million check landed in the boxing world through Dana White's Zuffa Boxing, paid to a fighter most MMA fans had never heard of. And in the weeks that followed, things started to shift inside the UFC roster. Several top fighters reportedly began making serious decisions about their future, with some even stepping away from long-term UFC plans to explore boxing opportunities. So let's talk about what really happened and why this could be the start of a much bigger movement inside the UFC. On April 11, 2026, a bloodied Conor Benn continued his march towards a world title shot with a points victory over a faded Regis Prograis at Tottenham Hotspur Stadium. The bout was the co-main event on the Tyson Fury vs Arslanbek Makhmudov card, and all three judges scored the bout 98-92 in favor of the Brit, who outworked and outfought former junior welterweight champion Prograis. But nobody was talking about the scorecards. They were talking about the check. The talk before the fight was not of the fight, but of Benn's reported $15 million switch from his longtime promoter Eddie Hearn's Matchroom to rivals Zuffa Boxing and Dana White. That figure, $15 million, guaranteed for a single 10-round bout, had landed in the combat sports world like a grenade back in February when the deal was first announced. It was Benn's first outing since his much-publicized 2 fights with Chris Eubank Jr. last year, and since parting ways with lifelong promoter Matchroom, having signed a high-profile one-fight deal with Dana White's Zuffa Boxing outfit in February. And after the fight, according to reports, Benn will now become a free agent, as his contract with Zuffa Boxing has apparently expired. One fight, $15 million, free agent. That sequence of words hit different when you're a UFC champion, making a fraction of that number. To put it in perspective, no UFC fighter has ever publicly disclosed earning a flat $15 million purse. While Conor McGregor banked massive money for his fight against Khabib Nurmagomedov, and Brock Lesnar scored big at UFC 200. The final numbers were heavily supplemented by pay-per-view points. The Benn deal was different. It was a flat guarantee. No PPV points, no performance bonuses needed, just cold, hard contractual cash for one night of work. The story gets even more eye-popping when you look at what Benn did with that money. Within hours of the fight ending, Benn showed off 2 new car purchases, a Ferrari F12 Superfast valued at $250,000, and a custom Porsche 911 Turbo S Cabriolet with his face and name on the side panel, also worth north of $250,000. $500,000 in cars the morning after a fight. That is what a $15 million payday looks like. Meanwhile, back in the UFC, the pay structure tells a very different story. UFC fighter pay in 2026 ranges from lower-level show and win contracts to multi-million-dollar purses for champions and major stars, but even those multi-million-dollar purses pale compared to what Benn just collected. It is believed that the career-high paydays of Max Holloway and Charles Oliveira may not exceed even a fifth of Benn's guaranteed fee. These are 2 of the most beloved fighters in the history of the sport. Between them, they have headlined dozens of main events, produced some of the most iconic finishes in UFC history, and helped grow the sport into a billion-dollar enterprise. And yet, here's Conor Benn, a boxer who, as one UFC star bluntly noted, many MMA fans had never even heard of, walking away with more money from a single night than most UFC champions earn in an entire career. The frustration was immediate, and it was loud. The Benn deal did not just make headlines in the boxing world. It detonated inside UFC locker rooms like nothing before it. And the reason was simple. The British boxer left longtime promoter Eddie Hearn and his Matchroom Boxing to sign with the Dana White-led promotion, which operates under TKO Group Holdings, the parent company for UFC. That last part is the key. The same corporate umbrella, the same parent company, the same decision-makers at the top. And yet, the compensation for fighters under that umbrella could not be more different. Former UFC middleweight champion Israel Adesanya looked at the $15 million figure attached to a single fight and asked a simple question. If that's possible under the same promotional umbrella, why not for UFC fighters too? In a YouTube video that racked up millions of views, the former 2-time middleweight king did not hold back. We know these boxers are the best in the world at what they do, but so are we. This is the UFC. We love ultimate fighting, not limited fighting. I want $15 million for one fight too. The statement was a thunderclap. One of the organization's biggest names, on a public platform, essentially telling his own boss that the math does not add up. Then came Sean O'Malley, the former bantamweight champion and one of the UFC's most bankable stars. His reaction was dripping with disbelief and a certain stinging honesty. "I don't even know who Conor Benn is." O'Malley said, "He's supposedly a pretty big name in boxing, but I've never heard of him. It's crazy, bro. If they really paid this guy $15 million, I don't know, it's crazy how you put in so much work in the UFC. Build this name, create this character, be a star. I'm not making $15 million to fight." O'Malley, to his credit, tried to see both sides. It's also a business, and if they think it's a good move and that guy is going to bring in money, I get it. He added, "Business is business." He hates Oscar De La Hoya, hates Eddie Hearn, so it's like, let's take their biggest star and pay them. I can see it being an ego thing, but even with that caveat, the underlying resentment was unmistakable. Here was a fighter who had done everything the UFC system asked of him. Built a character, sold pay-per-views, finished opponents in spectacular fashion, and he was looking at numbers from a sister company that dwarfed his own earnings. Former UFC flyweight champion Demetrius Johnson also weighed in. Like O'Malley, he hadn't heard of Benn prior to the signing. $15 million for one fight. It's crazy, Johnson said. Is Khamzat Chimaev making $15 million? Is Ilia Topuria making $15 million? Is Merab Dvalishvili making $15 million? We don't know, because those numbers are always hidden. But I truly believe it's a flex from Dana White, and perhaps the most devastating blow came from Matchroom's Eddie Hearn. The very promoter who had lost Benn to Zuffa in the first place, Hearn, still wounded from having his prized boxer poached, turned the knife on the UFC's fighter pay model. Hearn said UFC fighters must be sick as a dog seeing Benn's deal. If you're a UFC fighter, you're looking at this Zuffa and going, "What the F? I'm being absolutely ripped off here." He poured gasoline on a fire that was already roaring. "I think there'll be a revolt from the UFC fighters, to be honest," Hearn said, "because I think they'll be thinking, why are we making so much less than the boxers? When the show and the business and the revenue are so much higher." Max Holloway urged UFC competitors to know your worth in light of the financial disparities, highlighted by the Benn signing. When a fighter as universally respected as Holloway tells his peers to reassess their value, it carries seismic weight. This was not just talk anymore. Something was shifting beneath the surface. If the Benn deal was the spark, the exodus of fighters from the UFC orbit into boxing and rival promotions was the wildfire. The frustration did not stay confined to podcasts and YouTube channels. Fighters started making moves with their feet, not just their mouths. The most significant move came from the man holding the most important belt in the UFC. Heavyweight champion Tom Aspinall said, "I think it's bothered everyone. If one guy's getting paid $15 million and the other's getting $15,000. That's a big difference, which is one of the reasons I want to explore other options." And explore he did. Eddie Hearn signed Tom Aspinall after seeing the Conor Benn deal making headlines, bringing the UFC heavyweight champion into the Matchroom talent agency fold. A staggering, provocative move that sent shockwaves through the MMA landscape. Hearn said the deal will allow Aspinall to make significantly more money in commercial deals than he has for any of his UFC fights. Think about that for a moment. The reigning, undisputed UFC heavyweight champion, the company's most devastating active fighter, signed with the very boxing talent agency that Dana White had just poached Conor Benn from. The symbolism was deafening. It was not just a business move. It was a statement dripping with defiance, a signal that the UFC's top athletes were no longer willing to sit quietly, while boxers under the same corporate roof banked transformative money. Then there was Jon Jones, the man widely considered the greatest MMA fighter of all time. Jones complained that the UFC refused to budge over a $15 million offer to have him fight at the upcoming White House card, after he was reportedly offered $30 million for a heavyweight title bout against Tom Aspinall. The irony was suffocating. The UFC wanted to pay its all-time greatest fighter the same amount that Zuffa Boxing had just handed to Conor Benn for a co-main event against a 37-year-old coming off injuries. Jones, in response, said he wanted his release from the promotion, and the migration was not a 2026 phenomenon. It had been building for years. But the Benn deal accelerated everything. Many top names had already made the switch from UFC to boxing. Notable names like Conor McGregor, Nate Diaz, Jorge Masvidal, Anderson Silva, Tyron Woodley, and many more. But the latest wave was different. It was not retired fighters chasing one last payday in a boxing ring. It was active, peak career stars questioning why they should stay in a system that valued them at pennies on the dollar compared to a sport operating under the same parent company. That reality became undeniable when Francis Ngannou left the UFC in 2023, choosing financial freedom and crossover opportunities. He reportedly earned close to $10 million for his boxing debut against Tyson Fury, a staggering jump from the $600,000 base purse he received as the reigning UFC heavyweight champion. From $600,000 as the UFC's scariest man alive to $10 million for getting knocked around by Tyson Fury. The lesson was not lost on anyone with a functioning pair of eyes. Now, in the post-Benn landscape, Jake Paul's most valuable promotions is venturing into MMA, assembling a debut card featuring high-profile former UFC stars, such as Francis Ngannou, Ronda Rousey, and Nate Diaz. Rousey has been critical of UFC Chief Business Officer Hunter Campbell and has vouched for top MMA stars to be paid what they deserve. The landscape was fracturing, and the Benn deal had hammered the biggest wedge yet between the fighters and the promotion. While his fighters fumed, Dana White found himself straddling two worlds, and the contradictions were becoming impossible to hide. On one side, he was the UFC CEO who had spent decades arguing that fighter pay in MMA was fair and competitive. On the other, he was the co-founder of Zuffa Boxing, a fledgling promotion writing enormous checks to attract boxing talent. "I have completely removed myself from the negotiating part of fighter contracts," White said. "I got to a point where this isn't fun anymore, man. I'm lucky that I'm at a point in my life and in my career where I can just deal with the fun stuff that I like to do." That fun stuff, it turned out, was Zuffa Boxing. White has ventured into several other combat sports, with Power Slap and boxing two of his more recent passion projects. As Zuffa Boxing begins to pick up steam and create its own fan base, White has revealed that he is a little more hands-on with the newly founded boxing organization. The optics were catastrophic for the UFC's position on fighter pay, TKO with Zilla, collectively identified Conor Benn as someone they wanted to sign for one of those super fights in 2026, just one fight in 2026. While TKO executives later clarified that Benn's purse is being covered by their Saudi entertainment partner SELA. Not TKO alone, the optics still caught fighters' attention. The corporate spin that Saudi money was funding the boxing side, not UFC revenue, rang hollow in the ears of fighters who saw the same name, Dana White, on both sides of the equation. Zuffa Boxing is a professional boxing promotion company founded by CEO of the Ultimate Fighting Championship, Dana White, and chairman of the Saudi Arabian General Entertainment Authority, Turki Al-Sheikh. The company is a joint venture between SELA and TKO Group Holdings, the same parent company that oversees the UFC. For fighters watching from the outside, the distinction between who was writing the checks was meaningless. The name on the door was the same, and White was not just dipping his toes into boxing, he was diving in headfirst. "I'm going to sign everybody that we think has the potential to be a world champion," White said when asked about the kind of fighters Zuffa plans to recruit. Zuffa Boxing continued to bolster their stable with the acquisition of Richardson Hitchens and Edgar Berlanga. After conquering the world of MMA, UFC Chief White entered the world of boxing with his new promotional outfit. And so far, their biggest signings have been cruiserweight supreme Jay Opetaia and British star Conor Benn. Meanwhile, the UFC's own pay structure remained a lightning rod for criticism. Lawsuit text revealed details on UFC's entry-level pay of $10,000 to show, $10,000 to win. Many analysts believe UFC fighters receive a significantly lower percentage of revenue than athletes in leagues like the NBA or NFL. This has become a central issue in the ongoing debate about fairness and long-term sustainability in MMA. When pressed about the disparity, White offered an olive branch of sorts. Despite his assurances, the fighter pay issue continues to follow White to the extent that he's now forced to acknowledge that it will increase. In recent days, the matter intensified, especially after Conor Benn joined Zuffa Boxing. The development reportedly unsettled several UFC fighters, particularly with questions around their own payouts still remaining unresolved. Colby Covington, a former UFC welterweight champion, has publicly criticized the promotion's negotiation tactics. Covington claims the UFC forces fighters to accept take-it-or-leave-it contract terms, leaving them to choose between financial stability and their own worth. He believes this approach feels less like a partnership and more like a dictatorship, as fighters are essentially independent contractors treated as disposable assets. The UFC did make some concessions in 2026, though critics argued they were crumbs off a very large table. Beginning in January 2026, starting with UFC 324, The UFC increased its post-fight bonus structure, raising performance of the night and fight of the night awards from $50,000 to $100,000, and introducing additional $25,000 bonuses for any knockout or submission not selected among the standard 4 post-fight awards. But when your base purse for newer fighters is $10,000 and the company just signed a boxer for $15 million, doubling a bonus from $50,000 to $100,000 does not exactly quiet the storm. So here we are. Conor Benn collected his $15 million, went the distance with Regis Prograis, bought a Ferrari and a Porsche, and walked away a free agent. Ryan Garcia became world champion back in February with a unanimous decision win against Mario Barrios, and has been linked to a clash against Benn. There are many indications that a duel with WBC world champion Ryan Garcia is planned next, a fight that would likely earn Benn even more than the $15 million he just pocketed. Meanwhile, back in the UFC, the consequences of this one deal continue to reverberate when fighters like Israel Adesanya and Sean O'Malley react to Benn's reported payday. It's not just about one boxer or one contract. It highlights a bigger question fighters keep asking behind the scenes. If both sports now operate under the same corporate umbrella at TKO, will the economics eventually start to look more similar too? The structural issue at the heart of this entire saga is not new. The modern version of leverage is simple. Accept the terms or risk long periods without fights or income. Most fighters still face what's informally known as the Ngannou dilemma. Sign a long-term deal to secure title opportunities, or risk being sidelined. Top boxers often earn more due to greater negotiating power and access to multiple promoters and broadcasters. The UFC offers more structure and consistency, but critics argue this centralized model limits fighter leverage and earning potential. But what has changed decisively, and perhaps irreversibly, is that the comparison is no longer abstract. It used to be that UFC fighters would look across at Floyd Mayweather or Canelo Alvarez and shrug. Those were different universes, different sports, different economics. Now, the comparison sits under the same corporate roof. Conor Benn earned $15 million for his bout with Regis Prograis under a TKO-backed partnership. Crucially, Benn retains free agent flexibility after his one-fight deal, a privilege UFC fighters like Jon Jones do not enjoy. Matt Brown summed up the complicated reality. Could it get to a breaking point is the question, and when people like Jon Jones stand up and say, "I'm not going to fight for $15 million, that's when I think the ball can roll a little bit, but it's more like nudging the ball. The UFC remains a powerhouse. They're the top of the world," Brown said. "Everybody else is fighting for scraps way at the bottom. There's not even a close second, and that is exactly why this story matters. The UFC is not under existential threat. Nobody is suggesting the organization is about to fold or lose its dominance. What is happening is something more subtle and, in many ways, more significant. Whether or not the UFC antitrust lawsuit has White & Co. attempting to retcon the promotion's organizational hierarchy is unclear, but fighter pay remains a point of contention regardless of who's signing the contracts, especially when the decision-makers are bagging billions of bucks in content deals. The UFC announced a 7-year media rights agreement with Paramount Skydance Corporation worth $7.7 billion. $7.7 billion. And the fighters generating the content that makes that deal possible are watching a boxer they had never heard of cash a check that exceeds their career earnings. The truth is, Conor Benn's $15 million payday did not cause the UFC's fighter pay problem. That problem has festered for decades, but what it did was crystallize the disparity in a way that no amount of corporate spin can explain away. When the same parent company pays a boxer $15 million for a co-main event and pays MMA fighters a fraction of that for main events that generate far more total revenue, the argument that the market determines the pay starts to collapse under its own weight. Are UFC's top fighters truly quitting the UFC to sign boxing contracts? Not all of them, not yet. But the seeds have been planted, the examples have been set, and the precedent is now etched in stone. Francis Ngannou walked. Ronda Rousey went to Most Valuable Promotions. Tom Aspinall signed with Eddie Hearn's talent agency. Jon Jones demanded his release. And every single fighter on the UFC roster is now doing the same math that Israel Adesanya did on that YouTube video. If Conor Benn is worth $15 million for 10 rounds, what am I worth for 5? The UFC has built itself into a machine that does not need any single fighter to survive. But a machine still needs fuel. And right now, the fuel is starting to wonder why the engine across the garage is getting the premium gasoline, while they are running on fumes. How long that dynamic holds before something breaks is the only question left worth asking.